welcome to my simple but hopefully informational tutorial on how to create an HDR image. First, we're going to start off with three separate images. These particular images are the butterflies right here that we have in front. One is a little bit underexposed, one is of normal exposure, and one is a little bit overexposed. The reason that we have all these different exposure levels is because we want to capture all of these different exposure levels in one photo, which is the point of an HDR image. These particular photos were taken from one raw photo, and the exposure level was adjusted to get these different effects. Normally, when you create an HDR image, you would want to use three raw images, all taken at the same time, at different exposure levels with the camera that you're using, typically on a tripod. But in this case, because I was taking a picture of a moving object, which would be this butterfly, we had to adjust one photo to account for the wings actually moving. The HDR image would not turn out correctly because of the actual movement in the wings. So now that we have these photos, we're going to open them up in Photoshop. I'm going to zoom back out here, and we're just going to open them up in Photoshop. Now that we have our three photos open in Photoshop, again you can see the underexposed photo, the photo of normal exposure, and the overexposed photo. We're going to go up to File here, down to Scripts, down to Automate, and we're going to Merge to HDR. Now you'll see this dialog box here pop up. This dialog box is asking what files that you want to use to merge to an HDR photo. You have two options. You can either browse for the photos, or since we already have them open in Photoshop, we're going to add the open files. You see that they show up here, and we're just going to click OK. Now, again, it's warning us that you probably want to use the original camera raw files. In my particular case, we don't have them, so we're just going to click OK. Now, Photoshop is pretty much automating the whole process right now of taking all the photos and generating the HDR image. Right now, it is converting them all, and it is aligning all of the pictures so that they show up on top of each other perfectly. Now, in this particular window, we have a few options as well. Because we're using JPEG files and not the original RAW files, the actual metadata in the photos is not quite accurate or does not exist at all. What Photoshop wants to know is the exposure level of these three photos because, again, it's not automatically included. What we're going to do is we're going to click on this radio button down here, and we're going to set the exposure levels to what I know that they are because I created them earlier in a raw editor. This photo right here was overexposed manually by a range of 3. The photo right here was the one of normal exposure, so we're going to keep that even. And this photo right here was underexposed by -3. Again, we have the -3, the 0, and the +3. And we're just going to click OK. So this right here is our beginning of an HDR photo. As you can tell, there's a lot of range down here in the sand in terms of like all the overexposed pieces of sand and grains and stuff. We're going to set the white point over here just a little bit over to the right to get that sand a little bit of a darker color. I'll show you the details here. You can see how if we move it to the left, it gets a little bit too bright. Move it to the right a little bit, that looks just a little better. And we're going to click OK up here. But before we do that, we're going to change this setting right here called the bit depth. Normal monitors that we have aren't really capable of showing much more than 8 bits of color, so we're just going to change it to that, and we're going to call it good. So now it's actually creating the HDR file, and in just a moment we'll have something else that we can edit around a little bit. So here's our HDR file. We're going to use these settings right here to change it up just a little bit. The exposure and the gamma both adjust the light settings just a little bit, and how much light we have in the photo. So we're going to take the exposure, we're actually going to cut it down a bit here, just until we get it looking pretty good. We want the gamma probably to go up just a little bit, maybe down. What we really want is we want the shadows to pop out, but we also want all the details in the light to pop out too. So a little too dark there. Maybe cut the exposure up just a little bit more so we get the detail in the wings. We get a little bit of detail over on the wood here. It's going to vary from photo to photo. Adjust it to whatever you feel looks good, and then call it good from there. Again, everybody has their own unique tastes in what HDR photos look like. Some people are more picky than others, however, you can call it whatever you feel is good. So we're going to call something like this good. Again, we have a lot of detail on the sand here. We're just going to click OK. And we've generated an HDR file. If we compare this to our original file, you can see that a lot of the detail in the sand, a lot of the exposure has been brought out, and it gives it a very unique look. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.